We have a number of sanctions against Russia. It's the most sanctioned country in history now. Actually, it has more sanctions on it than all other countries in all other time frames throughout human history. The Europeans are now talking about an open ban on all sales of Russian crude, not just to the Europeans themselves, because all that would do is shift the pain. They're talking at the beginning of the process of talking about making sure that Russian crude can't make it to market anymore. That would mean, among other things, blocking ships from going in and out of the Baltic Sea, probably at the Skagerrak, and probably blocking ships going in and out of the Black Sea, probably through the Turkish Straits. Now, how the Russians would respond to that would be really interesting, but if the blockades are further back from Russian ports, the Russians militarily can't do anything about it. So we're looking here at removing 4 to 5 million barrels a day of crude production from the world. That is more than enough to guarantee an energy-induced depression that is global in scale. And the crazy thing is, we might even get there without an official sanction, because insurance companies are not allowing ships to go into these ports. The ports are shallow, so they can't take super tankers and then run it to China. So either you get this daisy chain of dozens of mid-sized vessels that are going to be loading onto a super tanker in sight of a NATO port and expecting that NATO is not going to do anything about it, or they just close the strait altogether. One way or another, we are headed for a very interesting year. Let me put it to you from the point of view of an outsider. So here we've got the United States, who has been moving down a path towards isolationism for 30 years, and it just wakes up one day, decides that it wants to get involved in the Ukrainian-Russian situation. It's been removing troops from the Middle East. It's been removing troops from Asia. It's been removing troops from Europe. When Biden was elected, we were at the low point for international involvement since Reconstruction. We had fewer troops stationed abroad since Reconstruction. So, we're at a 150-year low right now. And now we're telling people that they can't use the dollar or any currency. Everyone who thought that the American retreat was going to give rise to a multipolar world in which the United States had minimal power really hadn't been paying attention to how the world works. To have a global currency, the first thing you have to be sure of is that the country that issues the currency has to really not care about what happens with it every single day. Because if they're going to manipulate the currency in order to achieve trade advantages, then nobody's going to want it. And in addition, it has to be, sufficiently deep pool of liquidity in order to work. There's only one country that fits that criteria. There's only one country that's fit that criteria since 1945, and it's certainly not China. And people are discovering now, countries are discovering now, that if you want to be part of that system, there are certain things you can and cannot do. Invading countries that, for whatever reason, the United States should not be invaded makes the list. And so I would say that the biggest panic, the biggest damage that we are seeing from the Ukraine war, outside of Ukraine, obviously, is in China. Because in 1 month, the Russians have pulled back the blinders on what has been a 50-year strategic program. The idea that China can become the global power with American sponsorship, with American indifference, that it can take Taiwan, that it can intimidate Japan, that it can dominate all of East Asia and yet not suffer economically at all. It was always ridiculous, but now it's been shown to just be absolutely stupid. Now, the question moving forward, of course, is what's the next thing the United States is going to care about? And considering how erratic our politics have been for the last 15 years, that's a tough question, but it's something that every single country that trades now has to obsess about if they want to continue doing anything along the lines that they thought they could.
Right,
exactly. And there's nowhere else to go. I mean, the yuan is only traded internally because it's the most manipulated currency in history. The euro confiscates bank deposits to pay for bailouts. I mean, are there things that the Fed could do better, in my opinion? Of course. But compared to all the competition, I mean, there isn't any competition. Sure. Now, I'm not a financial analyst, so I'm going to put that out there at the beginning as a caveat. I am going to throw some numbers out there where I think this is going to go based on supply mechanics, but take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so Russia is the world's second largest oil exporter, and it exports via 4 main routes: one to China, one to the Baltic Sea, one to the Black Sea, and then via pipe to Europe. What's going on right now because of the Ukraine war is that the pipes that go to Europe are going to be disrupted either by the war itself or because Ukrainian partisans are targeting Russian income flows. One way or another, those pipes aren't surviving this year. The stuff that goes to the Black Sea is in a war zone. So insurance companies will not give the indemnification that is necessary for vessels to operate in that area. So the only way a ship can go and dock at Novorossiysk right now is if a country gives it sovereign indemnification and takes all the risk. Some of that is happening with the Chinese. It might be happening with the Indians. That's a little touch you can go. They're still under negotiation. Primorsk, that's the Baltic port, so right next to St. Petersburg. That is not in a war zone. So you can get insurance to go to Primorsk. However, ship captains, for the most part, are refusing to go, and European dock workers are refusing to unload the cargo when it arrives. So that is still in use, but not nearly as much, maybe a quarter of what it used to be before the war started. And then the final pipes either terminate on the Pacific coast near Vladivostok, or there is a short spur line that goes down into Daqing in northeastern China. Now, the western three, Black Sea, the pipes to Europe, Baltic Sea, those are interconnected to a degree. So if there's a problem at one port or on one pipe, they can redirect some, less than a third, but some of the crude to other places. It is completely disconnected from the eastern pipes that go to China and Japan. So if all the stuff in the West is shut down, which is what I think is going to happen, none of it can go east. The rail line is already operating beyond capacity. The pipelines are already full. You would have to build a fundamentally new infrastructure from the fields in northwest Siberia to Chinese population centers. That is greater than the distance from Miami to Anchorage, most of which is through virgin territory that is very rugged. That's a 10-year program, minimum, even with the Chinese building it. So one way or another, we are looking at those Western flows, which add up to 4 to 5 million barrels a day, going offline. There's still about 1.5 million barrels refined product that might go out, but most of that is going out via rail. So that'll be a little trickier to disrupt. I figure the Europeans can maybe disrupt half of that if they really want to. But we're looking at the single largest removal of crude from the market ever. And in proportional terms, it's going to have a shock somewhat similar to World War II. And that assumes that there are no downstream effects anywhere. Because we have insurance companies not doing it, shipping companies not doing it, dock workers not doing it, and now Halliburton, Baker Hughes, and Schlumberger have pulled out, and they do the technical work that makes a lot of this possible. All the super majors are gone. We even have a couple of major projects out in Sakhalin that are probably just going to die because the Russians can't make those projects work by themselves. Most of the oil and gas out of that goes to China. So we're actually looking at an environment where the Chinese see reduced flows rather than increased, as Russia is just melon scooped out of the market. I would say there are two kind of main threads here. The first one is at the end of World War II, the Americans changed how the world worked. We created free trade and globalization and told everyone that could participate in any market anywhere without military escort. They could access our market if in exchange they formed an alliance with us against the Soviets. We bought an alliance, and we guaranteed as part of that alliance their energy flows. So the primary reason that the US has been so bogged down in the Middle East for so long was because we had to in order to keep our alliance fueled. If the Middle East would have gone offline, the European alliance would have shattered and the Soviets would have walked away with Europe. That was the logic. Post-Cold War, we kept holding up the ceiling. We kept up our end of the deal, but there was no boogeyman. So people went their own ways. And in many times that meant that they started signing deals with the Russians. It's kind of